Masoret Haskanim, which is the traditions of the elders. And in Matthew 15, for example, we find, and Messiah is very clear about this, the traditions of the elders causes one to turn away from the commandments of God. And that's exactly what the Pharisees were doing. They were turning the people away from God's truth in order to bring them under bondage to their leadership. And that's not God's will. And because Messiah's purposes, His plans were against that, He wanted people to be brought under this easy and light yoke and burden of God that is placed upon us and leads us what? Beside the still waters, leads us in the pathway of righteousness, leads us joyfully in a praiseworthy life. That's what the Pharisees were not about. And because of that, there was going to be conflict between them and Yeshua. Well, He wasn't running away from that reality, but it simply wasn't the time. Secondly, the Scripture says that the light of Messiah, that is His revelation, is going to begin not in Judea, but when we look, for example, to the prophecy of Isaiah, the revelation of Messiah must begin in Galilee. So this is why when the Pharisees, they became aware of the fact that Yeshua was baptizing more than John, but as the Scripture says, it wasn't Yeshua Himself, but His disciples who was doing that. What did it say? Well, now look on to verse 3. It says, "And He left Judea, and He entered in again to the Galilee." And once again, that concept Galilee is for the purpose of revelation. So we're going to come upon a piece of Scripture that has great revelation for us. It depicts clearly what the purposes, what the objectives are of God in sending His only begotten Son into this world. So we read here that He left Judea and He entered into Galilee. Look at verse 4. "For it was necessary for Him to pass through Samaria," or what we would say in Hebrew today, Shimron. Now, there's something that at first sight doesn't make sense. What the Scripture is telling us is this. He's leaving Judea and He's returning back to Galilee. Last thing we heard is that He was by the Jordan River, and Him and His disciples primarily were baptizing. All people were coming. People were learning about Him. And what did He do? He departed. Why? Well, His time for conflict with the Pharisees and the Judeans, that is, the leaders of the Jewish community that were based in Judea, Jerusalem specifically, though it wasn't time for that. Plus the prophecy that He had to begin His ministry where? In the Galilee. So He departed there. And then we have this Scripture that says it is necessary. Remember, we talked about that word, the Hebrew word "day" in Greek. It means that which is absolutely necessary. It must take place if the will of God is going to be fulfilled. And the problem is this. Where is He? Well, we've talked about He's in Judea. And the normal thing, the simplest thing, the thing that everyone would do, is simply start heading north through the Jordan River Valley up to the Galilee. It is a straight shot. So it's odd. It doesn't make sense. We would say it's problematic that the Scripture says it's necessary for Him to pass through Samaria. Why? It's out of His way. Not only is it out of His way, but here's the problem. That the Samaria, the land of Samaria, Shimron, is up and down, up and down, up and down. So if someone was simply trying to get from the area around Jericho back to his place called Capernaum, Kfar Nahum, you would just take, and there's a highway today, Highway 90, that is straight and is pretty flat and goes directly between those two places. So it's necessary for Him to pass through Samaria. Makes no sense whatsoever. But here's the biblical truth. Whenever there's something in the Scripture that to us, to human logic and human wisdom doesn't make sense, that's exactly where godly revelation lies. So look again at this text. It says, "For it was necessary for him to pass through Samaria." Well, read on. We read, "And he comes to the city of Samaria, which is called Sychar," verse 5. "For it was near to the region, to the area, to the allotment of land that Jacob gave to his son Joseph." Now, when we're looking at Jacob and Joseph, remember an important truth. In a unique way, Joseph relates to Messiah. Now, we need to be very careful and make sure that we're on the same direction because of this. We know that the promise of a Messiah, the son of Jacob, is going to be through the tribe of Judah. We've talked about how the tribe of Judah is related to the promise, specifically the promise of the kingdom and the king of that kingdom, Messiah. But we also know from a Torah standpoint that when we look at the life of Joseph, there is great revelation for understanding the work of Messiah, being able to identify him. So it's not surprising that we're here at this location, this place Sychar, very close to the allotment of land that Jacob gave his son, specifically Joseph, as what? An inheritance. And understand the connection between inheritance and the kingdom. Ultimately, the name of the kingdom is going to be, in its final state, the New Jerusalem. And that term, Jerusalem, means to inherit the will of God, shalom. So the connection is very clear. So look again. And this place of Sychar was very near to the region or the allotment of land that Jacob gave to his son Joseph, verse 6. And there was there, and that term there is emphatic. What was there? A well. Now, a well is important because of two reasons. Well speaks of water. Water has to do with life. Life is the kingdom, but also we know that in many places in the Old Testament, when someone would come to a well, what would happen? Well, in a unique way, a marriage. That was certainly true when Eliezer came to the well and he met Rivka, and she would become the wife of Yitzchak, Isaac. And we see other places in the Scripture where a will is related to marriage. Now, why is that important? Well, he's going to be talking about marriage. And he's going to be talking about restoration. And marriage and restoration, what should come into our mind? Kingdom. So he's coming to this place, Sychar in Shomron, a place of idolatry, a place where people had turned away from what? The teachings of God. And they embraced the teachings of man. Very similar to what? Not the same teachings, but in a very similar like. The same thing of the Pharisees. So look again. He came there, and it says in the Scripture, and there was a well there, the well of Jacob. Verse 6 it says, therefore Yeshua was tired from his journey, and he sat thusly upon the well. Now, what I want you to see is this. This term, well, is being mentioned over and over and over. And what's there? Naturally, water. So, once again, the emphasis, water, water, life, life, kingdom. He is going to be speaking a message of kingdom. The kingdom reality. That now is the time to prepare for it. And what happens? Well, keep reading. As he was there sitting thusly upon this well, what happens? Well, it says it was approximately the 6th hour when a woman of Samaria came to draw water. Now, this is the vital point. There are so many indications here that we can just anticipate what's going to be the outcome of this passage. Why? Well, there is a well, number one. And this is close to the land that Yaakov gave Yosef. Yosef, typology of Messiah. We see now that it's also at the sixth hour. The number 6 has to do with grace. Grace has to do with the fulfillment of God's will. What God provides so the will of God can be a reality in our life. And then what's the next thing we see? Well, we see there's a woman coming. And whenever a woman takes